To the Fridge and Pantry review. 35 everyday products for everyday people. This review is for you if you're not a fan of cooking, if you're really busy and don't have time to cook everything from scratch, and so you need some quicker options to have on hand. If you've just found out you have a food intolerance, it'll be especially useful if you have a food intolerance to dairy, as I avoid dairy and this is my fridge and pantry I'm reviewing. But it'll also be useful if you have issues with gluten, soy, and a couple of other foods as well. It'll be useful if you're trying to eat less meat, or if you've recently decided to follow a vegetarian or vegan diet, or if you're feeling a little bit like this. You just saw your naturopath, and now you're trying to figure out what you can buy. I can completely resonate with this because if you see me shopping, this is how I look quite a lot of the time, analysing the labels. There's so much information out there and it can be really overwhelming when you first begin changing your lifestyle and your diet style to find out exactly what you can buy and what you can eat, because there are so many different sources of information telling you what you should be doing on the packaging of the products, on the front, on the sides, on the back, on the nutrition panel. There are books telling you what you should be doing, there's blogs telling you what you'd be doing, articles from all sorts of sources, and so it can be really confusing to figure it out. And then you go and see someone and then they give you a list of things that you can eat and can't eat, and it's maybe no less confusing after all of that. And so I thought, rather than having a list of just names on a page, I would try and make something a bit more useful and summarize it for you so that you could see this is what I'm buying, and you can begin looking at these labels yourselves. And I'm going to go through some with you during this presentation just so you can begin to get a feel for what sort of things we're looking at and how I'm thinking when I go shopping. Because I first got interested in nutrition about 25 years ago now. I was early high school when I was first interested in nutrition, and so I organised my science degree setting up because I really wanted to go down the nutrition path. And then I spent a number of years in medical research science. And then after a number of years I decided to discontinue research and study naturopathy. And so I've sort of looked at this from both sides of the fence, and personally as well, as I've had food intolerances, my kids have had food intolerances and all other sorts of health issues, and then clinically the changes that I see, and I find nutrition to be one of the big needle movers for people's health. And depending on who you're seeing and how they work, they'll have a different belief on just how big a role nutrition plays in health. But for me, I really believe nutrition is a huge needle mover in your health, and I see amazing results of people changing their diet styles and nutrition eating habits in clinic, as I've seen in my own personal life. And I'm always looking and always asking questions to try and see that, you know, we're doing the best that we can do with what we have. And so if you're watching my stuff, I'm hoping to show you a pretty balanced view and a pretty rational view. You'll find, especially if you're online a lot, that you'll see all sorts of opinions and information and some really extreme beliefs about nutrition, and you know, it'll seem very rigid and very tricky if you're following the people who make it seem more tricky. So basically this is to really give you a balanced view and not be fanaticist about it, but try and actually be following the practices that really, you know, help make health better. So I thought this would give you a place to start. Another reason I wanted to put this little review together is because whenever I've gone shopping looking for something that a friend or, you know, fellow naturopath has told me about, and I'm scouring the shelves, and it can be really tricky to find that product if I don't know what I'm looking for. And so I thought, if I just open my fridge and my pantry and take photos of everything that I've got, even if in your part of the world you don't have the same products on the shelf that I've got, you'll at least have some context for what quinoa looks like, or you'll think, okay, that's what I'm looking for. it looks like this, and so it'll help narrow it down for you when you do go to your shops, and suddenly things you've never noticed before might start jumping out and you'll begin to pay attention to them. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to my pantry. A really quick disclaimer here. I just like to let you know I don't work for any of the companies whose products I'm reviewing here. This is just a simple review of things that I've tried and liked and that I've actually got at home. And if you were to visit me, you would find a number of these things in my cupboard because I'm always trying new stuff as well. And these are the things I currently like, but as new products come out or I get clients with different needs, I'm always buying and tasting and cooking with and trying to find things that are relevant to the people that I'm seeing and helping. So I may do another review down the track because there's heaps of things that I like that I've tried that I haven't actually managed to fit into this review. Otherwise we'll be here all week. And as much as I love nutrition, I'm sure that there are other things you've got to do. So the next disclaimer I'd like to make is that I deal mainly with food intolerances in clinic, and personally we have a food intolerance. But if you have a serious allergy or you're preparing food for someone with a serious allergy, so an allergy is different to an intolerance, be sure to check all the labels for traces of that allergen. Companies change their labels from time to time, and so don't make any assumptions. Always read the label. And also, if you have celiac disease, for example, always check that the quinoa that you buy actually is produced and packaged in a gluten-free facility, because just because quinoa is a gluten-free grain, it doesn't necessarily mean that the one that you buy will be free of traces of gluten. Same with your rice and things like that. So always read your labels to make sure. And if you're at all confused or concerned, just have a chat with your allergy specialist. So the broad category of products that I'm going to review in this little talk are basically things that I find that people find the most tricky when they're changing their diet from a clinical standpoint, and also things that I found the trickiest to change from a personal one. So I'm going to be covering some milk alternatives, some breakfast foods, lunch foods, dinner foods, and some other alternatives that help make your new diet style still a little bit fun. So things like cheese alternatives that actually taste like cheese, which you really appreciate when you give up dairy, and other things as well like sauces and seasonings and some of the things like little desserts. So just some context before we look at my pantry and fridge review. What ultimately ends up in your shopping basket and in your fridge and in your pantry, like I said earlier, is it's really to do with a whole host of things. It's your knowledge about nutrition, and that can either be what you found out yourself or the resources that you have who are giving you nutrition information. So, for example, if you have a nutritional healthcare practitioner, like a naturopath or a nutritionist, it'll also be dependent on the resources that you have available. So in naturopathy, we love organic food, but not everybody can afford 100% organic. So it's how you're going to make the best choices with what you have. Or you might live somewhere remote, so you don't actually have these sorts of options available in the supermarket that people in the city would have, and vice versa. If you're seeing a naturopath or someone in the natural nutrition, natural health world, we've also got a bit of a food hierarchy, and as I sort of alluded to, we like organic foods and fresh foods and all of that. And lastly, the other thing that's going to impact what ends up in your pantry and your fridge are also your consciousness about other issues when it comes to food and sustainability and environmental friendliness and the bigger picture. The naturopathic food hierarchy, this is a summarized version. I've got a much longer version of this, but again, the talk, I want to really get into the pantry foods. So I'm just going to touch on this to show you. Basically, we would love the majority of your diet to come from fresh, whole foods with minimal processing. In an ideal world, everything would be homemade and there would be no need for additives. The reality is, not everybody has that sort of time or space to store all those whole foods. And a lot of people don't even have the equipment. And so if all you've got in your kitchen is a stick blender, you're not going to be able to make your own flour or anything like that. And the same thing, if you're living in a really small apartment and you don't have green fingers, you're not going to be able to grow your own salad veggies either. So it's about working with what you have access to and making the best choices. So, you're going to have some foods with some processing, and you need to ideally just avoid the nastiest additives and put it in perspective how much of your dietary week is that food choice. And, down the bottom you want to have, that's your 5%, where, sometimes you get home late and you just have a convenience food, and it might be a jarred sauce or, frozen veggies or whatever. It's the best that you can do with what you have at hand. So let's get started. And we're going to begin with milk alternatives and breakfast foods. The first thing you're going to notice when you start to look at plant-based milk alternatives are that there are so many of them now. It used to be pretty much soy milk, and now you go to the shops and there are 100 different options. I've chosen to talk about 2 in this particular review because otherwise I'll be here, as I said, all week. And so the 2 I'm going to talk about are soy milk and rice milk. But there are a whole lot of other options, and I will be talking about them down the track in future reviews. These are my 2 favourite dairy milk alternatives based on flavour and appearance. The rice milk is my personal favourite, and I find that most people who are coming off dairy really like the flavour of the rice milk. And also in terms of cooking and appearance and stuff, it's quite easy to substitute in your cooking as well. Just like soy milk, most of these dairy milk alternatives you can pretty much substitute one for one with your cow's milk, but they all do have a different appearance, a different texture, and a different smell and flavour to cow's milk, which obviously because it's not coming from a cow, but they also have a different smell and taste to each other as well. And if you're used to it and you substitute it in a recipe, you're not going to notice. But for example, someone who's a hardcore dairy lover will not like, coconut milk used in a particular recipe, for example. They're really going to find that smell and taste of that is going to be off-putting. Whereas something like rice milk is, I find, pretty innocuous, so it's not really noticed as much. So what do you need to look for when you're shopping for a plant-based milk alternative? Well, if you like soy milk, and I think soy milk's usually a good option for people who really like the appearance and the thickness of cow's milk, because it's probably the thickest in terms of it's the most viscous, so it feels sort of the thickest, but it's also the most white and least see-through out of all the plant-based milk alternatives. And so if you are looking at a soy milk, the thing to look for is that you're getting a milk which is made from whole soybeans. And if you start looking at the labels next time you're in the shops, you're going to notice that some of them don't use whole soybeans. Some of them just use the protein extracted from the soybean and then a whole range of other additives to it. So the first thing you want to do is choose one that's made from a whole soybean. And if you live somewhere in Australia, for example, where we can actually put on the labels that the product is genetically modified free or whatever, then that's cool. But if you're living anywhere else in the world which doesn't have that freedom of labelling, then going for an organic choice will let you have one which is organic, which is pesticide free and free of GMOs as well. Okay? And same with your rice milk. Again, just check that it's actually made from whole brown rice, because often there can be just other ingredients in there that you don't necessarily want. And the next thing I'd like to point your attention to, just while I'm talking about ingredients, is if you have a food intolerance or a specific dietary need, please always check the labels, because sometimes the milk alternative that you buy can be not just rice milk, for example, the rice milk that I really love is rice milk, and it's also got chickpeas added. So for most people, chickpeas are innocuous, but if you've got a food intolerance and you're really sensitive to the fibre in the chickpeas, for example, then this one might not work for you. But there are a whole range of options, and even from the same company which makes this particular one, which is just plain brown rice, okay? And it still tastes lovely. So you might just have to read a few labels and see which ones are suitable for you if you've got another food intolerance. And again, like with the soy milk, a lot of them have other things added to them. So for example, if you're on a gluten-free diet, this particular one wouldn't be suitable because of the barley. However, just read the labels, because there are so many options now and a lot of them will be suitable. So just keep looking on the labels, and you'll find that information in the ingredient panel. This ingredient panel here is often found under this nutrition information panel, which is this one here. So the main thing people are concerned about when they switch to a plant-based milk is, but what about the protein and what about the calcium? And so let's just start comparing some labels here so you can get some context for this. Dairy milk has around 3.3 grams of protein per 100 mils, and soy milk has about 3.2 per 100 mils, and rice milk has about half that at 1.5 grams per 100 mils. And that's only this particular rice milk, which has been enriched with chickpeas, and that's what's given it the extra protein boost. Okay, so a conventional rice milk, which is made just with rice without chickpeas, would have less protein again. Okay, and as you can see here in the label, the company have explained the difference, and they're saying this one is 1.5 grams per 100 mils, whereas their conventional plain rice milk is 0.3 grams per 100 mils. Now, you're going to be saying, oh, but what about almond and all of these other milks? I encourage you to go and look at the labels, because you're going to see all sorts of ridiculous nutritional claims. So always start looking at the panels themselves and the ingredients list, and start making sure that the claim that is made actually adds up to the numbers that are on the box about what's inside the box. Okay? So the next thing that people worry about is calcium. Where are they going to get their calcium from if they're not having dairy milk or any dairy products? And the great thing is nowadays most of your plant-based milk alternatives are calcium enriched. Not all of them are. So again, just have a look on all the labels to make sure, and have a look on the table. It's on this sort of nutrition panel here, which you'll usually see that. And pretty much when they're enriched, they're generally enriched so that they're on par with the dairy milk. So for example, a glass of rice milk will give you the equivalent amount of calcium as you would get from a glass of dairy milk, so you wouldn't be shortchanged there. And this particular soy milk is enriched with a little tiny bit more, but basically the take-home message is you can buy calcium enriched plant-based milks, so you can still get the calcium and you don't have to be worrying about that. The other benefit, of course, as well, is if you're looking for products which don't have cholesterol in them, or if you've got an intolerance to lactose, then your plant-based milks are free of both of those things, where the dairy milk isn't. Okay, so this is a good place to begin. Also, you'll find that some plant-based milks might be enriched with additional nutrients. So things like vitamin B12, for example, and vitamin D might be useful depending on the vitamin D, which part of the world you live in. Some countries enrich their milks with vitamin D. Not many of our plant-based milks are enriched with vitamin D here in Australia because we get a lot of sunshine. But the vitamin B12 is an interesting one, especially if you're following a completely plant-based diet, so if you're vegan, for example. Of course, the amounts that it's enriched with may or may not be enough for your diet, and generally I'd be recommending vegans to be supplementing to make sure, and testing, getting their bloods tested to make sure their B12 levels are adequate, because deficiencies can be quite serious. But again, this little bit of enrichment here might be suitable and useful to your dietary needs. So how do you use these alternative milks? Pretty much like you'd use a regular milk. An example of where I use the rice milk is in the spicy chai smoothie, which is in my free recipe ebook, and I'll have the link to that at the end, so if you're interested you can download that for yourself and get this recipe. But you can do all sorts of combinations here. It's pretty easy. Put your favourite things in the milkshake and blend it up really, and it'll take on a bit of the taste of the plant-based milk. So soy milks will taste a little nutty, which I used to love, and the rice milk will be pretty sweet, and all your other plant-based milks will have their own characteristic flavour as well. So begin playing with them and see which one do you like the taste of the most and which suits your dietary needs as well, especially if you have a need for some of the extra things that the milks are enriched with. I also just use the milk on the muesli or cereal or in porridge, for example. In summer we like to make muesli, and this is my current favourite muesli, though now that it's winter here I'm using just plain oats and making porridge. And this particular brand recently switched to nut free, which is still lovely, though it's got quite a few sultanas in it, so you may or may not like that. If nuts work for you, you could actually add nuts to that as well. So you can always add all sorts of things and make all sorts of interesting breakfasts depending on how much time you have in the morning. Sometimes some of these packaged whole foods, it doesn't take a lot of effort to add a spoon of some of the seeds I'm going to show you, for example, and so you can still add even more nutrition to your breakfast without a lot of extra time involved. But in summer, when I've got a bit more time, I like to chop up some fresh fruit and put it in our muesli as well. Another place that I use that particular muesli again is the pear and cherry crumble recipe, which you'll find in the free recipe book, the Everyday Food Ideas for Everyday People. So again, I'll give you that link at the end. And I basically do it because it's sweet, it's spiced, and I don't have to change it. I just add that in the recipe, really easy. So another breakfast alternative, if you like cereals, and especially if you like, your puffed cereals for the texture of them, is amaranth. Amaranth is a gluten-free alternative, but always, if gluten is an issue for you, you need to actually check to make sure that the product that you buy was actually made in a gluten-free facility, so it's free of the traces as well of gluten. But in terms of taste and texture, I love it. I think it's really cool. It's light and fluffy. It really doesn't have an overpowering flavour at all. And one of the things that I like to do for the kids is just sprinkle a little bit of cacao on top, or carob, and our plant-based milk alternative, and you have an instant chocolate puffed cereal for breakfast, and the kids love it. So, and I love it too, I've got to say. It's nice to have for those fun days. So what you might add to those base cereals is something like linseed, or here it's LSA, linseed, also called flaxseed, sunflower and almond meal. It's quite a popular mix, and this particular one comes pre-ground. Now ideally you might love to grind your own, because then everything will be fresh and less likely to be oxidized. That's great. But if you don't actually have a blender which is capable of doing that, this is the next best option, and you can store it in the fridge after you've opened it, and all you do is sprinkle a spoonful over your cereal or in your smoothie, and you're adding an extra dash of nutrition to the meal. With the flax seeds, you're getting some really great plant-based omega-3s, which are your good fats, so good for your brain, things like that. And with the almond meal, you're getting some minerals, because nuts are a good source of minerals. And so it's a nice way of adding extra nutrition to your meals. Another thing that you can add really easily is chia. And what I do is I add some chia and some amaranth to the muesli in our little muesli container in the cupboard, so I actually don't have to blend them all every morning. It's pretty much there when I pour it into our bowl. Chia is a great little seed. It's really packed with nutrients. It's got some good minerals in there. It's a reasonably good source of protein for the relatively small amount that you use, and again, it's a really rich source of plant-based omega-3s, so again, your essential fats. And the good thing about chia is, because it's a whole seed, I find it's easier to, as I said, pour it through my cereal. That way in the morning we've got it ready to go. Whereas something like the LSA, which is ground up, you're probably going to want to keep that in the fridge a bit more. So it's less convenient to mix through your cereal already. So it depends on how short for time you are. Taste-wise, it doesn't have an especially overpowering taste, which is why it's a really good thing that you can add to your cereals and just get a little bit of extra nutrition. What it will do is, if you leave it standing in your milk or your smoothies, as with the LSA, the linseed, the flaxseed and the chia will thicken up and make the drink a little more jelly-like. Not quite like jelly, but that'll be the best way to describe it. So another nice thing to add to your cereals are other nuts and seeds. So you've got so many options here, it's not funny, but among the favourites are walnuts, almonds, pepitas, some Brazil nuts, cashews, hazelnuts, sesame seeds, in addition to like the chia seeds and the linseed that we've already talked about, and sunflower seeds. There's heaps of options. So if nuts work for your diet, they're a great little addition. Chop up a few and just sprinkle them in your cereal, and that'll give you a bit more oomph and help your breakfast last that little bit longer. Walnuts are also a great option if you're looking for plant-based sources of good fats, because they've got a really good omega-3, which is the good fat, to omega-6 ratio as well. And lastly, don't forget to have frozen fruit on hand. So if you're the sort of person that attracts gnats around your fruit bowl because you just don't really eat the fruit and you buy it just because you feel like it should be there, having some frozen fruit in the freezer is really handy. And the other thing I like to do with the frozen blueberries is, while it's winter, for example, we're having a warm breakfast, I'll make up porridge and then I'll sprinkle the frozen blueberries in the porridge, and that'll help cool down the porridge, so that way it doesn't burn our mouths when we go to eat it. And so we sort of get the best of both worlds. We're getting some fruit, especially something like blueberries, which are beautifully rich in antioxidants, and we're also getting a warm breakfast. So keep this in mind. And you can, of course, you can add them to smoothies if you prefer smoothies, or you could just thaw them and eat them like that if you wanted to as well. There's heaps of options, but it's a really handy thing to have on hand in the freezer for either at the end of the week before you go shopping when the fruit bowl is empty, or if you know yourself well enough to know that any fresh fruit you buy is just going to end up as a gnat attractant. Okay. So let's move on to some lunch or dinner foods that I have in my fridge and freezer. So these are hands down some of my favourites. I've got these on hand for the times I don't have to make my own. I love cooking, and so I actually like making burgers and patties with the kids. But for the times I don't have time to make it, I've got these on hand, and they're really cool because you can cook up a few in advance and then either get them out when you need them to put them in your lunch, or have them as a snack when you come home from school or work. And the thing I love about these is if you find them in the freezer section in your supermarket and you check out the labels, they're made with pretty much whole food ingredients. It's mostly just a legume, so like the Asian bean is a zuki bean, for example, and the lentil burger is lentil, and they've got garlic in there and some veggies. It's amazing. It's really great. So check them out. They taste really nice. And I also sometimes use them when I make a roast. Another option, if you do like to cook, I'll show you some of the ingredients in these down the track, but this particular recipe is in the free ebook, and they're my something fishy fingers. They're fishy because there's no fish in them, and so it's like a vegetarian fish finger. They've basically got canned beans in them and some vegetable, and you mash it up and roll it in breadcrumbs. These are the breadcrumbs I use, and you can bake a whole lot up in one go, and then just pull them out as you need them to either put them in the lunchbox or have them as a snack when you come home, or heat them again and eat them for dinner that night. Just make them and store them in the fridge. These breadcrumbs, I just like to show you this particular brand. Orgran, I find, is a really good go-to beginning brand because they make so many convenient alternatives for so many conventional products. It's great. They've got, custard alternatives if you like custard, for example. They make bread mix and breadcrumbs and pastas, and so there's a whole lot of options, and it's a really good place to begin. And if you can see, like, the labels, they're suitable for a number of different food styles. So for people who have to avoid wheat or gluten, dairy, soy, egg, and they're vegan friendly. So it's really handy starting place. Another thing you might like for lunch are crackers with whatever topping you like on top. These particular crackers are really delicious, and they're really crispy as well, which I like. I mean, you might have, if you've been eating healthy for a while, you see some things advertised as crispy, but it's really not. It's more cardboard-like. These are actually crispy, so that's quite nice, and that's why I like them. And again, they're free from a number of things, making them suitable for a number of people, which is just fantastic because nowadays it's not uncommon to have either more than one food intolerance yourself or more than one food intolerance in a family. And so, how many different things you need to have on hand, the more products you can get which are actually convenient for more than one person is helpful, both on the budget and on your space if you don't have a very big pantry. Like, I don't have a huge pantry. So the things that I like to put on top of the crackers are avocado, tomato, hummus, rocket, and sometimes a bit of dairy-free cheese. So this is my favourite dairy-free cheese at the moment. I've tried quite a few now, and the ladies at the local vegan shop here in Adelaide recommended this one as being really good, and they were right. It really is the closest to cheese. And I was watching a seminar not long ago which basically said that cheese is probably a harder thing to take out of the diet than meat, and I have to agree with that. I don't really miss meat at all, but I do miss cheese. So finding a suitable alternative is tricky. And how do we use this? We sprinkle it on tacos, on occasion, or it makes the pizza more special whenever we make it. It's not an everyday food, and really not even an every week food. Might be on the odd sandwich, if it's, if we're making it. But yeah, it's something we add to sprinkle here and there to make it a bit more special. But it's, it's not the 95% of our diet, it's the 5%. If nuts are an issue, this particular cheese contains nuts, so it might not be suitable for you. Okay, another handy thing to have in the fridge are salad veggies. So we get fresh veggies delivered, but there's that time at the end of the week where the veggies are no longer, we run out, and we're starting to look a little bit like that nursery rhyme, Old Mother Hubbard. And so it's sometimes handy to have these packaged fresh veggies on hand because it's just not always convenient to get out and get to the shops. And so this way we're still at least getting something fresh on our plate as well. Okay, so it just adds to the options that we have. And so if that is your diet, or again that you buy them and the fresh ones go moldy, especially if you have to wash them and chop them up too much, maybe getting something which is a little bit less processing involved, because it's a smaller vegetable, so you don't have to break up the rocket. You pretty much just wash it and put it on your plate. That might be more suitable for you than getting something like, for example, a whole iceberg lettuce, which you'll want to rinse each piece and slice it up, for example. A lot of these shopping tips really are starting to understand, how you are as a shopper and an eater and a cook. And if you don't like doing things, finding products which are suitable to save you time with that. So moving on to dinner foods. So you might not like cooking. As I said, I like cooking, but I don't always have the time to sit there and blend 100 million spices. So it's really nice to have some simple packaged, what I'll call home fast foods. So, a really good jar sauce or a packet mix like this, which is really made with mostly whole food ingredients, and you're just adding like a can of tomatoes and some water, and you're letting it simmer for half an hour. So while this is cooking, I'll prepare the other elements of the meal, so like steam some green veggies, for example, or some potato or rice or whatever we're serving with it. And we're ready to eat within half an hour, which is fantastic, whereas if you were doing everything yourself from scratch, it would be a lot longer. So these ones are really quite tasty. This particular product comes with another flavour sachet, which, to be honest, I never use because I overcooked it the first time I made it, and then I found it a bit spicy. And so I just like the plain packet mix. It's really quite delicious. So this is one that I keep on hand in the cupboard. And again, as I said, if you look at the label, it's pretty much lentils and spices, and you just add tomato to it. So it's really cool. Another really tasty one that I like to have on hand for days I just don't have that energy to do it all is something like this. I've tried about 3 from this range now, and they're all pretty tasty. And the other handy thing is that they're gluten-free and dairy-free. So in our family, we don't eat dairy, and my niece doesn't eat gluten because she's got celiac disease. So something like this is quite handy to have on hand. There are other ways as well. You can make your own sort of simple homemade meal from packaged ingredients really easily, like these 2 dishes. And the basis of these is a rice, and probably my favourite rice to have on hand is either brown basmati rice, or I like the purple rice that you can see here. I just get the brown basmati rice from the supermarket, and the thing I like about it is it cooks within about 25 minutes. And ideally, sometimes if I get down to the organic shop, I'll get organic rice as well. So to have a look around and see what your options are with where you're shopping. Good thing about rice and the next one, quinoa, is they're both gluten-free. So again, if you're cooking for someone who has those needs, these are some great options. Quinoa has a very specific taste. I find it's got a smoky, sort of almost burnt taste. Maybe that's just my taste buds, but yeah, it's got quite a distinct flavour. And you pretty much cook quinoa like you would cook rice. They're small little round grains, like you can see. And yeah, you could cook it in water, you could cook it in stock for a bit of extra flavour, or you could even cook it in milk and make like a porridge with it and add sweet things to it. And that can make quite a delicious porridge. I've done that quite a few times. So it's pretty versatile, really. And what else would you put in the sauces? Well, legumes. So for example, heaps of options. Everybody thinks that plant-based diets don't have much variety. What do you do when you cut out the meat? And it's quite funny, since we've eaten more plant-based, we're not wanting for variety. There's lentils, chickpeas, azuki beans, yellow split peas, red lentils, green split peas, black beans, black-eyed beans, cannellini beans, kidney beans. There's so much variety. And before I was eating a lot of chicken and some fish. And so, yeah, there's certainly a lot of options when you start looking to other food groups. Great thing about your legumes, if they're suitable for you, is that they help feed the good bacteria in your gut. They've got the fibers in there get digested by the good bacteria in your intestines, and it basically helps feed them and promote them in a healthy gut. So they're good in a number of ways. They're relatively low in calories for the amount of nutrition that you get for them, so they're quite nutrient dense. They're high in fibre, they have a great source of minerals, and they're really filling as well. So they're quite handy little things to have on hand. And when you're going shopping with the legumes, the way to save time here is to have canned ones on hand. So have the whole variety that you'll soak and cook up. But for times that you don't have the time to actually cook it and put it all together, the canned is a great option. And what you want to look for with the cans are that ideally the can is BPA free, and ideally they're organic. And you might want to compare the sodium levels amongst the cans as well. And lastly, sometimes they've got additional additives, but most of the time when you read the labels, you'll be seeing the bean, whatever the bean is, water and salt as the 3 ingredients. So the next thing that you can have on hand is pasta, because I come from an Italian family, so pasta is something that we've had quite a bit growing up, and it's a handy little thing for those days when you're in a hurry. You get some sauce, you get the pasta, and add lots of vegetables and legumes, and there you go, you've got dinner. And just letting you know that you can actually get brown rice pasta. So the great thing about this is if you've got gluten sensitivities in the house, it's gluten free and it's from brown rice, so it's got more fibre in it than some of your conventional gluten-free alternative pastas might have. And there are now a range of companies available that are producing this. So moving on to sauces, seasonings and dressings, because these things sort of fancy up your meals a little bit. And something I really like is this little seasoning I found in the supermarket, in the seasoning aisle, so with all the other salts and spices, and it's basically Himalayan salt with herbs, and that's all it is. So it's really fantastic that it's very simple and so flavoursome. I like to put it on the roast veggies, and so that's just one way, but there are heaps of ways you can use it. It's just a really lovely little seasoning. Something else you could sprinkle on your veggies or your salad would be something like apple cider vinegar, and putting some vinegar on your salad is helpful for the digestion. And I've also got a nice little dressing recipe in that ebook, which is the tangy slime dressing, and if you download the ebook you'll find out why it's called slime. There really is no slime in it. Okay, moving on to snack foods. What about when you have people over? What would you eat then? What do I have on hand? I make my basil pesto dip, and that recipe is in the free ebook, and basically it uses that cheese that I showed you earlier, some nuts and basil, and it's quite yummy. Another handy thing if you're dairy free to have on hand is something like dukkha. This is dukkha made locally from our local vegan store here in Adelaide, but you can, lots of people make dukkha, and it's basically whole food ingredients. It's whole nuts and seeds just all chopped up with some spices, and it's lovely, and you just can dip it in some olive oil, and it makes quite a nice little social dip to have. But if nuts don't work for you, another option might be something like this avocado spread, which I found in the fruit and veg section of the supermarket. It's in the fridge part of the fruit and veg section, and it's fantastic because it's basically just mashed avocado with a little bit of salt. So it's a handy party dip if you don't have time to make everything from scratch and you've got people coming over. It's one of those handy things to whip out of the fridge, or again, if it's that time of the year where all the avocados are looking pretty dodgy, again, you could use this on your in your wraps or in your sandwiches or on your salad, for example. So moving on to sweet things and hot drinks. Now, I get a lot of people who drink coffee in the clinic, and if you're one of my preconception care clients, I also like to give you a little protocol for how to stop drinking coffee. So the first step of that is to ideally switch to an organic coffee, and this is a plunger coffee, this one here, and I get these from my supermarket, and I think the labels are now, the most current label is the one on the left, but I don't drink coffee anymore, which is why I've got some old labels still in the house. So first of all, switch to an organic coffee, and then when your taste buds are adapting and the habit of making coffee in the plunger has changed, then I like to switch people over gradually to a decaffeinated organic coffee. And you're basically looking for the coffee which has been decaffeinated in a way which doesn't use any chemicals. And so one of the good ones to look for is usually the Swiss water filtered method. And your relative difference in caffeine between the two, you're looking about anywhere from 80 to 100 milligrams of caffeine per cup from regular coffee to anywhere from about 5 with the decaf. So it comes down quite a bit. And then they could switch to something like a low caffeine tea. Something like this Ceylon tea, for example, which is naturally low in caffeine. And according to the website, this particular one has about 4 milligrams of caffeine per tea bag. But bear in mind that that's going to change, depending on how long you soak your tea bag for, how long you let it steep for example. So when it comes to sweeteners, now there's a lot of hype about sugar-free and everything at the moment, but I'd just like to show you that there are some alternative sweeteners out there, and especially if you're plant-based and I've got some vegan clients who don't have honey, for example, it's nice to see what other alternatives are out there. And so rice malt syrup is one you might not have seen before, and it's got a lovely, subtle, sweet flavour. I use this in some of my recipes, and it's quite lovely and just really subtle flavour. It's, for example, if you've had golden syrup is quite a strong sweetener and honey is more mild in flavour, I would say rice malt syrup is even more mild than honey in sweetness. So it's a really good one if you're just trying to get your taste buds used to different flavours and different levels of sweetness. And also the handy thing about rice malt syrup is it's a low GI sweetener as well. Another popular sweetener that you'll see and that I've just started playing with some recipes is coconut syrup. And again, it's another low GI sweetener, but also I find this one has a richer flavour than the rice malt syrup. And again, I'm playing with it in some recipes for my vegan clients. So what would you put on, that special occasion treat if you missed dairy? Something like coconut cream, whipped cream. And if you check out on my website, if you go to the website and in the search box you type in coconut cream or whipped cream, the recipe of how I make this will come up. And it's just an easy little recipe, and basically the main thing you want to look for is a coconut cream which doesn't have any stabilizers in it. Otherwise you'll be whipping for a very long time. So check out that post and that'll give you some more information on how to put that together. And an example of where I use it, this is the pear and cherry crumble from that free ebook. But the recipe for how to make the coconut cream is on my website. Something else that I use in the crumble is this almond Brazil and cashew spread. It's also really nice to have on toast or even just to dip like veggie sticks in. It's just, yeah, a lovely nut spread. And the great thing about using a blend of different nuts is that you're getting different minerals as well, because each nut has a different nutritional profile to it. I mean, they're all commonly reasonably high in fat. They are a source of protein and a source of minerals, but they've got different minerals in them. So getting a blend of nuts as opposed to just having something like peanut butter, for example, just gives you, again, exposure to different nutrition in your day, and it's a really lovely flavour. Another spread that I like to have on hand is tahini. It comes unhulled and hulled, and again, you'll find this in your local supermarket. And basically, the unhulled has a stronger flavour than the hulled, but it's got a delicious, probably I'd say it's got a little bit of a burnt sort of flavour to it, but it's really lovely. And I like to stir this through the creamy pumpkin soup, which is dairy free. And you could dip carrot sticks or apple in it. It's lovely, and it's also nice on toast with some banana, if that suits your diet. And this was a lovely little find, coconut yogurt. It's a yogurt alternative. Now, with the cheese and the yogurt, and again with the milks, as I said, because they're not dairy based, they're going to have a different nutritional profile than their dairy counterparts have. So, for example, the dairy-free cheese isn't necessarily a source of calcium. Read the label to see if it's been added, and if it hasn't, then obviously, look at your diet if that's something that's important for you. And same with the yogurt. So, again, being as this is made from coconut milk, which isn't naturally high in calcium, for example, this is not going to have the same sort of nutritional profile as your conventional dairy milk yogurts will have. And the other thing is, because it's not made from dairy milk, it'll have different probiotic cultures in there, and health claims about probiotics are really strain specific. So just bear that in mind when you're looking at all your different sorts of alternatives out there. But this particular flavour of this yogurt is absolutely lovely. It's like whipped cream, and it's very rich, but it's divine. And I use a tiny bit of this in my creamy pumpkin soup. So another thing that I always have on hand for us and the kids to reach for is fresh fruit. And I know it seems so obvious, but this is what I do have at the house all the time. And the fruit will change depending on the seasons, but we generally always have pears, apples, and bananas, as well as frozen blueberries. So another thing to look out for and to have on hand as you're changing your lifestyle, and something that I use every day, is our stainless steel water bottles. I've had these particular ones for a couple of years now. As you can tell, they're well loved and well used. And apart from just being a more environmentally friendly choice because you're not going through so much disposable plastic, the main health benefit here is that you're not being exposed to the hormone disruptors that the plastics which the throwaway drink bottles are made from can leach. And so things like phthalates and BPA, which really aren't good for us, you can just reduce and avoid the exposure to those things by using something like a stainless steel water bottle. So the things that you would want to look for when you're looking for a stainless steel water bottle is to check that it is actually food grade stainless steel. And I've had a couple which they had a really weird taste to them. So it shouldn't have a weird taste. It should really be quite inert and not be an issue at all. And also you want to check that they're not aluminium or aluminium lined with BPA, because again that just sort of defeats the purpose of trying to avoid the plastic. And lastly, if you're going to keep them in your handbag, for example, you want to try and get a seal which is as watertight as possible, and so both of these are pretty good. You might get some leaking depending on how much you shake them. The one on the left I find is pretty good, but to be honest, I don't lay these down when I've got my phone in my bag. I have a different screw cap which I could use for times when I have to screw them down and lay them down. But all different brands make them, and there are different types available. I've tried quite a few, and these are my favourites so far. But as I said, I'm always trying new things to see if I can find something that's even more convenient or even more practical to use. But yeah, I've been pretty happy with these so far. So this brings the presentation to an end. I really hope you found it useful. I really wanted to put things in here that were practical and that you could go home and start applying as of your next shopping trip, or even now if you want to just, turn this off and go and look in your fridge and pantry and start, looking at your ingredient panels and just start looking at the foods that you've got in more detail than you might have looked at before. Products are changing all the time, and I'm always trying new things as I get clients with new needs, because I like to really be able to give people practical things that they can apply. So if you would like to keep up to date, just head on over to the website and enter your details, and you'll receive access to the newsletter, and you'll also receive a copy of the free ebook as well. And I will be adding various resources to the freebie section for people who are on the newsletter list, as well as some other talks and things down the track, some other resources as well. So being on the newsletter list just means, one, you get access to any new freebies I add there, but also you will get access to the newsletter so you'll know when they come out. So I really hope you enjoyed it, and I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and feedback. If you want to either email me via the website or check out the Facebook page, and you can message me via the Facebook page. It's been really great putting this together, and I really hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Bye.